Sarah, it's all yours.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much for having me here today. It's a real pleasure. I've never actually spent time with this group before, so on both a personal and professional level, my father is an electrical engineer, and I did not become an engineer, so I'm going to send him whatever pictures you take of me speaking at this conference and send it to him so that I can win some chits in that category. But seriously, CSIS, the group that I run, the Energy and National Security Program, we spend time looking at markets, technology, policy, all the kind of drivers of change that we were just talking about in the keynote address, and try and provide policy insights to government policymakers and solutions to the companies that we work with. So I suppose we are the ones who are trying to cut through the swampiness of the swamp and provide some insight to those who are active in the energy space. And it's my great pleasure to have such an esteemed and knowledgeable panel to talk to you today about U.S. energy markets and challenges. I will dispense with the introduction since we just did it and we're a little bit short on time, but needless to say, the viewpoint that the group that I work with has is that, a lot of the companies are on the leading edge of some of the changes that we're seeing in the energy market, and we're not done seeing that change. And I think that this is reflected a lot in what Undersecretary DeBar was just talking about, that sort of period of time that we're in where there's lots of innovation, there's lots of change to the energy markets that we're seeing. No doubt the last 10 years, the amount of change that you've seen in the oil and natural gas production, hydrocarbon gas liquid production here in the United States has been nothing short of remarkable. The World Energy International Energy Organization, in their annual World Energy Outlook, proclaimed the surge in hydrocarbons production in the United States to be the largest organic surge in production ever in history. Which is a pretty remarkable thing to have been part of and to be watching. I think we've also seen remarkable cost declines in terms of renewables and the generation mix that we've been able to add into the electric power sector. So all in all, the energy sector is a good news story, but that doesn't mean that it's without its challenges. And I think one of the things that we note quite a bit is the kinds of changes that we're seeing with the fuel diversity and the abundance of the supply that we have in the United States as electric power sectors throughout the country are dealing with both trying to incorporate an abundance of energy into that mix while also making the electric power sector more flexible and diverse and resilient to a range of challenges. So what I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time talking with these gentlemen about how they view the challenges in their field, but also the opportunities. And so maybe just, Steve, you're sitting next to me, so maybe we'll start with you. Where do you see the greatest pressures in the market these days, and how does it affect how you plan and execute for your business?
We're affected by a number of key factors. One is the abundance of natural gas. There's been a huge shift from a scarcity of natural gas to abundance, and the abundance is not just for the U.S. domestic market, but on a global basis as well. The second factor is the rapidly declining costs of renewable technologies and their ability to play a significant part within the electric grid. The third item causing a lot of transition is a growing and a majority view that everyone wants cleaner and more sustainable approaches to their energy solutions. So those three drivers and shifts in the marketplace have caused companies such as ours to need to change dramatically and to need to change quickly. So we've moved away from scarcity of natural gas to abundance, which means more work generating power with natural gas. That generally involves large advanced technology gas turbine projects that have efficiencies that we would have never dreamed of even 10 years ago. But it also moves into huge amounts of renewable technologies being deployed across the grid in the U.S. That primarily is in the form of solar and wind projects, but other forms are emerging as well. That can be in large utility scale projects, but also in distributed projects as small as rooftop solar. And so we've had to adapt from the largest project, most complex projects that we've been known for in our history to being more agile and more nimble to deploy distributed projects around the globe. So we're no longer going to project sites where we're gathering up hundreds and thousands of craftsmen and staying on a single site for multiple years to we're moving around on a daily basis, installing small solar applications. That's a huge shift in the culture of the company and just the way we do business, and it's required that we create new business models. The other area that's affected is in our T&D business, which is seeing the effects of the distribution of generation and the issue associated with vast amounts of renewables being generated in locations that are away from the major load centers. So that comes back in the form of more transmission lines and more substations. There's complexities arising now with the distributed generation and work that's arising out of that. The last factor then has to do with the abundance of natural gas and the ability to both export and import that around the globe. So historically, natural gas has been developed and consumed in a fairly tight geography, generally distributed through pipeline networks. But with the abundance in the US, we're looking at huge export facilities, but we're also engaged in import facilities around the globe. So we'll do an export facility here that may be delivering LNG cargo that's moving to Asia, to say India or China, which is a great impact for our economies. We're producing vast amounts of energy that are moving around the globe instead of the reverse situation that we had for so many years. So that's caused us to be mindful of changing how we do work, but also the kinds of solutions that we're bringing to our clients.
No, that's great. Okay, so we've heard a little bit about changes to your business model because of distributed generation, the complexity that distributed generation brings, the focus that it's had you bring on things like T&D, but then also having to anticipate the growth of the global LNG market, which is no small feat. Right. Jack, same question to you, but maybe in addition, do you see particular regions of the country where some of these challenges are more acute than others?
Yeah, that's a really big question. I had to write notes because I'm not good enough to remember everything. But you know, we always encounter market pressures, and for the first time, I think that I personally believe that we really have to start working together to be successful. And the big players in our markets really are the federal government, the states, and the major regulated utilities. And if we don't get these all people to work together, we're going to look much different than 10 to 15 years from now. So from about 100,000 feet, maybe, the view on business planning, it's who's the client. It really comes down to us a lot of times. It used to be really easy. It's not so easy today. We have IPPs now competing with IOUs, which is the independently owned utilities. We have FERC 1000 driving us to compete or not to compete with IOUs within other IOU service areas, which both of them are our clients. We have merchant electric transmission line projects that sometimes conflict with ISO and grid planning. Again, both those guys are our clients. And we have the renewable boom, which Steve talked about, which is good, but sometimes the renewable portfolio standards, the investment tax credits, and the production tax credits are really driving less smart projects. So for our company, the big challenge is really balancing potential conflicts with clients versus just doing what we used to do, is fun, challenging, and profitable projects. Another pressure is the unique regionalization of numerous issues. And recently, both California and New England area sued the EPA for stringent air quality performance requirements. If this is successful, it'll be a huge driver in these regions to really accelerate zero to really low greenhouse gas projects, likely a fast death to coal and an increased pressure on gas, like we were talking earlier. It also is likely to be a driver to having these regions importing more firming power, which is another problem because getting into California and New England has been a major difficult with permitting times, not only for gas, but also for electric. You know, a few other things that you think about are electric vehicles, you know, so I guess there's no doubt we're going to do more of that. So as we do more of that, the local grid usage and operation is going to change. I don't know all the things that'll happen there, but it's not insignificant. And we know that change is coming. And last is a real pet peeve of mine, some of you will laugh, but it's environmental streamlining. I think I've been on this for friggin' decades. Is a popular term. And it's no need to change the environmental requirements, just permit submittal review times. I mean, today, when it takes 9 years to permit a line, it's tough to get investment. It's even tougher to know what systems will look like 9 years from now. It's a major barrier to smart electric gas infrastructure development.
Great. All right. So, Jack, you introduced a bunch of new themes, which are, things like just keeping track of who the client is these days, the fact that regional energy priorities matter a great deal in terms of project selection, and the favorite issue of regulatory streamlining, which I think we can get to in a discussion in a little bit. Dan, what's the view from your company, and also, do you see particular segments of the business under more pressure than others?
Well, a couple of things, and not to repeat what Steve and Jack went through, but a couple areas. If you look at some of the merchant markets, PJM up in the Northeast and ERCOT, a lot of pressure in those areas with the abundance of low-cost power, pressure on the nuclear and coal plants, a huge transition. Undersecretary Jabbar talked about the advanced turbine technology. We're currently installing several combined cycle projects with advanced turbine technology. The projects are getting bigger. But in other segments of the market, one thing that hasn't been mentioned, if you look at the current installed base of solar and the projects under development, we soon could be looking upwards of 13 gigawatts of power that grid operators somehow will have to figure out how to replace when the sun sets. Mm-hmm. So the instability that's going to usher into the grid is very significant. Steve mentioned the distributed power. There's a lot more power in places that there didn't used to be. There's demand in places that there didn't used to be. And with the increase in renewables, the instability of the grid, we think, is going to be a major driver going forward. Mm-hmm.
Dan, I'm glad you brought up sort of innovation and some of these new technologies. It was definitely a theme for Undersecretary Jabbar. It's clearly an important part of what's changed the energy mix so far and anticipated to do so going forward. Each of your companies is involved in deploying new technologies. And so while we just talked a little bit about some of the challenges you're seeing in current markets, your jobs as CEOs of these companies is to find the opportunities, the business opportunities. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that. Steve, are there areas where you guys are seeing new opportunity to deploy some of these new technologies?
Absolutely, and that's a growing portion of the work that we do for our clients. So Jack mentioned EVs, because we're working on charging stations across the country. That could be Tesla's system to provide a countrywide system of chargers to be able to go from one coast to the other. Can be for regional players or utilities that are building in specific areas, but we're building hundreds of EV charging stations a year, and that's a growing part of what we do. But we also see that as an opportunity eventually to help solve part of the problem that Dan mentioned about the grid stability. So to the extent we find good ways to incorporate EVs and battery storage on the grid that are there for charging many times for long periods of time, that can help stabilize the grid. Mm-hmm. We're also looking at various means and are installing hydrogen fueling stations for some of the automobile companies that will help diversify the fuels. So there's a lot of innovation happening on the transportation side that we think can help spur further innovation in the way that we bring those solutions together to not only strengthen the grid, but drive down the various costs of delivering infrastructure and transportation, for example.
Mm-hmm. Dan, you had mentioned the combined cycle natural gas power generation, and the example that Undersecretary Jabbar had brought to the table was this notion that batteries could be competitive with that, going forward. I think, we traditionally, and not this audience, but certainly policymakers tend to think of batteries as one thing, as opposed to all the different functions and roles that they could play. I know this is something you and I had discussed. Can you talk a little bit about where you see storage opportunities in the work that you do, like the variety of places and where they could make the most impact?
So right now, the way that we look at it in the market's a little bit playing catch up with storage, because we ran out, we built all these renewables, and now there's a need for storage. We're actually talking to clients about baseload renewable facilities that would couple battery storage with renewable, either solar or wind. And I think going forward in the future, there won't be renewables built without a coupled battery storage, because it's really kind of a short-term program right now of again, playing catch-up with battery storage.
And Jack, what about you? Where are you seeing some of the opportunities?
Well, I can comment on that one right away. We see a lot of battery energy storage projects. We do a lot of them. For today, right now, most of them are for frequency control and voltage stabilization, and not as much for actual energy storage. But as Undersecretary DeBar mentioned, if they triple or quadruple the storage capacity, that's a game changer. You know, for me, opportunities are everything that we just talked about, these problems. And for power engineers, what we did is we selected the electric transmission grid. And because we really felt, due to everything we've been talking about, the investment tax credits, production tax credits, we get a lot of projects put on the grid that are in the wrong place. Really good for our business. Really bad overall for the long-term piece of it. But today, you know, with the renewables, and you got low, cheap gas, you're creating new generation mix, is what kind of Dan just said. These are really, really great opportunities for the engineers. New grid reliance, let's see, how do you say that? Resilience. New grid resilient problems that we have, those are all going to be significant capital investments and just fabulous for engineering people. I've got some examples. We do a thing called DSCADA. I don't know if we made it up or somebody did, but it's electric distribution level automation. Has been in great business over the last 5 or 6 years. In general terms, this is just using programmable relays to allow remote operation of distribution systems, just creating increased flexibility in systems and reducing labor costs. It's really good. NERC compliance is something we've all had to deal with over the last decade, as NERC came down and said, each system has to look at some specific pieces and how you operate. And it's driven a lot of really small, simple innovation things that were really not that costly. Conductor design, you know, maintenance techniques, just changes the whole system operating criteria, you know, not as conservative as we were before. And it's also driving utilities to start thinking resiliency and sustainability along with safety and economics, which has been really great. It's going to be great for the grid. We mentioned renewables. The rapid development of renewable portfolio standards, ITCs, PTCs, is giving wind and solar just a fabulous opportunity, and it's really given us a great opportunity as well. You know, you can go on. I mean, the intermittent part's a problem. Today we're installing voltage support frequency and control devices. We have things like STATCOMs, a start fire compensation, series capacitors, energy storage schemes, hybrid generation schemes that B&V does. They're all requiring new engineering. It's just an amazing transition. And what we are really lucky as we are really in the digital age, because much of the required technology and data is really available, and we're only in the beginning stage of learning exactly how do you take advantage of it? How do you implement it? And then I have another point here that I always have to say is, you know, with intermittent renewables, non-regulated renewables, coal plants shutting down, outside public pressures, our system has been put in a place it wasn't designed for. You know, it's really wasn't set up to do what's happening today. So we have to capitalize and solve having different peak time generation with load profiles over a whole bunch of grids. At some point, you know, the feds and the interregional people are going to have to cooperate on how they handle that. The best answer is creating a national energy strategy, which would be a national energy policy. And we probably can't do that. So the ultimate opportunity for engineers and the grid in my world is to create an integrated national grid, because that'll give us all kinds of cool things to do with advanced control systems. And we're going to do that anyway, but with the current grid system the way it is, it won't be as effective or efficient as it should be for us engineers, but it will be really cool and we'll make a bunch of money, I hope.
I will.
You know, please.
So I might add on the intermittency question that we're seeing as a result of the renewables. You know, if you look back not too many years, you can see parallels between what's happened with solar panels and wind turbines with what we are starting to see on batteries or will see in the coming years. So those costs have come down a very steep curve. Many of you are aware of something called Moore's Law. which is a very steep curve. We witnessed that in the cost of solar panels and wind turbines between the cost reductions and the performance improvements. We're at the early stages of that on batteries. There's a lot of money that's being invested by DOE, but there's a lot of private money that's going into that area as well, and that is the ultimate solution that we need to make all of this work better together. I'm very confident that that's on its way. The trends are there, clearly there, and that can be either in large facilities or it could be future installations similar to what we do with Tesla now on smaller package systems that are on a distributed basis. But that will happen, and my own view is it's not that many years out.
Dan?
One of the things you talked about, battery storage, and we've been looking at the installation of battery charging stations as well. And if you draw a curve out about 10 years and you look at the amount of battery storage that will be distributed in electric vehicles, just charging overnight, and what is the opportunity for those to serve as intermittent battery storage. You pay a fee for the cycling of your battery, or you receive a fee, but what are the grid opportunities for that? I think the electric vehicle prominence is going to be a real game changer again. And you draw a curve 7 to 10 years out, it's going to be very significant.
One of the things I wanted to ask, based on some of your comments, we typically in Washington try and get a sense of, is policymaking in front of technology or is technology in front of policymaking, right? And what I've heard you say is there's a lot of creative destruction going on within electric power markets in particular, right? There's a lot of new policies in place that are generally designed to make the power mix cleaner, more diversified. I think we've done a fairly good job of figuring out what kind of policies and incentives drive down the cost of renewable energy generation so that we can put them into the mix. But what I'm hearing you say is maybe we haven't entirely figured out how to work them into the electric power generation mix, how to manage those grids. Do you think that some of these issues are going to be solved by a greater role for things like storage technology, or do you think that this is an area where we really do need to have some, whether it's a national energy policy that has a completely connected grid, or more of a focus on microgrids that really sort of disaggregates a lot of this kind of innovation? What do you think is the leading edge of who's going to put this together? Because what we're seeing is a very sort of bifurcated conversation about whose responsibility, how much should we care about baseload power generation that's being moved out in some competitive markets and those sorts of things.
My feeling is that it's really being driven by innovation and technology, and policy is following somewhere behind.
Be generous on how far behind.
Because if you look at what the transition that we're going in right now, I think it's happened much, much quicker than just about anyone had foreseen.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I agree, but I don't disagree either. I think state policy, like renewable portfolio standards, have really driven a lot of bad things to happen, but have driven us to create things faster and smarter. So it's actually, in the end, really helped. And I think along with that, the more stuff you sell, even if you don't put it in the right place to start with, you're manufacturing, you're learning. So our technology, going back to what Dan said, it's getting better and better. And if we get some storage that'll do 10 megawatts for 24 hours, you'll have 3 different guys up here maybe next time.
Okay.
That's a game changer.
My view is there is a role for regulatory action, but I believe that if you look at it today, it's incredibly difficult for them to know what the right answer is, because the technology is moving so quickly that they would be trying to take a snapshot today, make some prediction. And I think if we've been able to prove anything, is we can't pick the winners when we're looking out into the future, and we're better with innovation. We're better at allowing things to develop and then trying to make sure that we set high-level regulatory action on the grid. That would need to be around reliability and security in my view, and then there's some cost issues that need worked out. Primarily those cost issues at the state levels. Some of that could be done today. But I believe in letting innovation play out.
Its course. Okay, so let's back up from markets and technology for a minute. There's a bunch of other issues that are facing everybody who is acting in the energy sector in these days. One of them is trade, the other is cybersecurity. Let's start on the trade piece. Whether this is, we've seen a number of trade actions under the course of this administration. I think if you take a longer view, we've seen an effort to sort of integrate the U.S. role in markets broadly. Right now, we're sort of renegotiating some of those agreements. We're negotiating some tariff rises on things like steel and aluminum, and basically trying to level the playing field again with China on things like IPR. How does this affect your business? And happy to have
Well, I'll speak up in the short term. For us, the tariffs are just a real challenge. I mean, when we're trying to get pricing from equipment manufacturers and materials, and no one is willing to guarantee a price for very long, that puts a real challenge on folks in the business of getting price certainty. So in the short term, it's causing a lot of disruption. I think the uncertainty around that is causing our clients a lot of hesitation, pushing projects further to the right. Maybe in the long term, that's going to increase some manufacturing jobs in the U.S., but certainly in the short term, it's a problem for our business.
Right now, most of the things that we specify is engineered and manufactured equipment. Almost all of it comes from overseas, but we haven't really seen much in that area. We're not really big enough to be big buyers. We don't see the commodity pricing all the time. But on the transmission side, it's all steel poles. So today, I would say if it's 25%, that's a pretty significant number. Right now, they aren't having the tariffs on it. But if they do that, it will definitely add cost to the project. But with that said, in the regulated utility environment, they'll just roll it into the rate base and charge the consumer, right? So those guys will only hit a small bit, or we will pay more money. IPPs, developers, merchant project guys, they're going to have 25% or whatever it is right to their bottom line on the steel. So I don't know if that kills jobs or not. We're going to see if it happens, I guess, huh? And the uncertainty is right on. I mean, it's very difficult on the polls now for them. They'll give you a price at a certain steel point and no tariff. Yeah.
Steve.
On the tariff side, our first issue that we encountered was with the solar panel tariffs that were applied, or that rule was circulated last year as we waited for certainty around that. It definitely delayed a number of our clients' projects around the U.S., and that was both private and regulated type companies. But what we saw happen fairly quickly was as they understood the tariffs and they understood the impact of their projects, they were able to adapt fairly quickly to that. And we've seen some of those projects already move, say in the last 60 days. And there's some others that are they've worked their way through the process. They're confident they understand the impacts. They're still good projects, so they're moving forward. There's still some that are lagging in that process. So we saw a relatively short time period of impact. On the steel and aluminum tariffs, I think it's still too early to know the impact. The initial reaction was we saw some pretty significant spikes in prices depending on what was being bought. Clearly there was a lot of uncertainty in the supplier base, and we've got a lot of uncertainty. We don't know how the rules are going to be played out. I think we sent 50 questions or so into Department of Commerce trying to understand all the ramifications of that, and we're still in a seeking to understand mode there. I would add, you threw trade into your question, and I got back from a trip to China a couple of weeks ago. I met with some of our clients and several of our partners, and I think what I saw, it was the week that the announcements were made. So when the Chinese newspapers and everything, I was reading it, depending on which paper I would pick up, it was front page, absolutely front page. But the discussions with our partners which are state-owned entities and large state-owned entities, were very positive. They continue to want to work with us, but I think more importantly, for the U.S., they're still looking at investing in infrastructure projects in the U.S. and other Western countries. So they did not back off at all. I think they are curious. They're curious about what will ultimately come from the U.S., but also how their government will respond. That particular week they were coming out of their large party gathering, so they were pretty well versed on at least the initial reaction. So I didn't see any panic, and I didn't see any backing away from continued investment in the U.S.
In the U.S., okay. I want to touch on cybersecurity briefly. One, because the cybersecurity experts that we work with say cyber espionage has reached really historic proportions. There's a lot of data collection. The threat is magnified, but at the same time, you know, much of industry has done a great deal to harden some of the assets that they work with. This administration, and Undersecretary DeVar didn't mention it, but has focused a great deal on cybersecurity in the the electricity sector and the energy supply mix writ large. How much is cybersecurity a growing area of concern for you versus where it always has been?
It's right up there for me. You know, it's a huge issue because we don't really know what the compliance issues are going to be or their perspective. Recently at ACEC, we brought in NIST, GSA, Commerce, NERC, and DOE, and every one of them is working on compliance standards for cybersecurity. They don't really talk to one another. So if that doesn't scare you, it should. You know, at Power, we've done a lot of things internally to try and make it happen. You know, we got a cybersecurity group. You know, we use the same tools as everybody else, antivirus, you know, firewalls, procedural controls, and education. But, you know, from a national security standpoint, from my perspective, I went back to saying that we get all our manufactured engineered equipment from overseas. Well, if the world kind of goes upside down a little bit, we're in a real pickle on software and hardware and maintaining our electric grid and our generation plants. Mm-hmm. That seems like a doomsday way of doing it, but it's possible. I did write down 4 things that scare the crap out of me.
Should all have a list.
We don't know what the legislation is coming, but we know it's going to cost us. We don't know what cyber platforms we should use. We picked 27001 ISO to be compliant. I don't know if it's the right one or not. But you need to have an answer when your clients ask you how you're protecting our data. This, of course, will come at a cost, and it won't be a one-time cost. Mm-hmm. What are the future liabilities? We talked about it the other day. I'm not sure, so we bought insurance. A little amazing that people sell insurance for it. But it was obviously at a cost. And then today I don't believe we know what the legal system is going to do. But you damn well know it's going to cost you money. So I wish I knew more, and I wish we all knew more on that. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we should, I mean, we should always focus on the little phishing and all that, because that's a problem, and that's education and procedure. But what about the bigger picture of having us all on the same page? Would be nice.
Would be nice. Dan, Steve, did you want to add anything to that?
Really, I'm on the same page with Jack. I think our number one concern there is really compliance. Our clients are of several different minds on how they want to see this and how they're writing it into our contracts, and we're really trying to get our head around really a new area of compliance with cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm. Steve?
I don't have a lot to add either, but most of the work we do, we work hard to comply for our clients with the NERC regulations. But as Jack mentioned, there's still a lot that we don't know because others out there trying to do us harm are continually evolving. And so I think this is something we're going to be faced with for many years to come. It's not like we're going to put in something and it's going to be lasting for any period of time. I think we'll be talking about this for a very long time.
All right. I want to open it up for the audience to ask questions, but right before we do, I think the last thing I had wanted to make sure, I think you guys have gotten it on the table, but you're in Washington, this is a policy town. If you had your Make-A-Wish magic wand, what would you want policymakers to do to help alleviate some of your concerns?
Ooh,
Ooh, go ahead.
environmental streamlining. I know
You mentioned
people are
that in
tired
the
of hearing
audience,
about it, but it's killing us.
It's killing
7,
us,
8,
yeah.
9, 10 years to get a job permitted. I mean, the whole environment's changed by the time we get the dang permit.
All right.
Yeah, and the gentleman earlier asked about FERC, and Steve and I are working on a project together where we'd really like to see FERC define consistently the term in the public convenience and necessity, because there's been a lot of debate over what is, what does that mean? And again, the uncertainty around that really causes our clients concern with going through a, year and a half NEPA process.
Yeah.
I'd take it.
3 for 3.
3 for 3.
One of the project we're working on with Dan's firm originally started out as an import terminal, which tells you how long we've been working on that. So the timeline to get through the regulation was so extensive that we then subsequently had the shale gas boom. We're now a net exporter of natural gas, and we're trying to get approval to move forward with an export facility. So that, I think, speaks for itself. It needs to get much quicker.
All right, well, let's get some questions from the audience. Let's see, I can't see extremely well. Any questions? None? Come on. So usually what happens is you ask the first question, nobody wants to do it, and then you've got 12 questions thereafter. All right, well, you must have answered. Oh, no, you do have one. See, it always takes a minute.
You've talked about the challenges. What about your view from industry leaders on finding the talent to meet those challenges?
It's a very
Could
good
you comment
question.
on that, please?
Yeah. Talent, human capital, who'd like to go?
Go ahead.
Well, when you deliver projects, you always have to start with good teams in order to deliver a good project. So we're, I believe, as we always have in our history, paying a lot of attention to talent. My own view is that the younger professionals coming out of college have good work habits. They're very interested in doing the kind of work that we do. They're interested in our mission and doing the kinds of projects that we offer. They are obviously very, very interested in learning as much as they can. And I would say from my perspective, they're much more polished than I ever was at their point in time. They're much more focused on their career than I ever was at that time of my career. So I think the talent pipeline is very encouraging in terms of the quality. The biggest issue is just in the quantity of talent, and I'm sure you'll hear that from probably everyone in the room. But we're trying to solve that. We believe the opportunity there is to do what we can to encourage more young students to think about careers in the STEM fields, and we're investing our own personal funds into various approaches that we think will encourage them, expose them to those kinds of fields, spark an interest in their mind, in the hopes that wherever they end up working, whether it's our company, anyone else on the stage, or anyone out there, that we have more engineers and more people with technical backgrounds in the future.
Jack?
I've got one thing to add. I agree with everything Steve said. One other thing is we have a resource issue, but we are in a really nice technology innovation age, so we are really accomplishing more and more with less. Oddly enough, we still need more engineers. So that's the only thing I have to add to him. So
I'm with Steve. I'm very positive, actually, about the men and women that we're hiring right out of school. The one thing I would tell you, they demand more than we did. They demand the best technology, the best tools, the most positive workplace. They demand that they work collaboratively and that their management facilitate that. So I'm really, really positive. We hire a lot of folks out of a lot of schools, and we spend a lot, invest a lot in the development of our talent and also on our technology tools. So I'm very positive about the future.
Okay, we might be able to squeeze. Oh, there you are.
Does this work? All right,
There.
Question. I agree with Jack on the national energy policy, although my hopes are pretty low because President Nixon talked about a national energy policy in the early 1970s, and I don't think I'm going to live another 45 years. Because of all the intrastate issues,
Yeah.
and also the political issues around different regions, you see more of a movement to a regional kind of energy concept, a regional grid, kind of like what Texas is doing to other parts of the country. I'd like to just have some discussion around just
So you mean like
power delivery and just, in general, just different regional pockets in the country versus a national.
Yeah, that's how we operated in the 50s and 60s and 70s,
Yeah.
which worked pretty good. I don't think that's the right answer, though. I mean, I'll let these guys talk in their opinion. This is just personal opinion. If you want to have a really efficient grid, you need to be able to move electrons east, west, north, south, and make up for the intermittent renewables that come on daylight and the winds when they blow, and be able to transfer that across all the state lines and all the ISO lines and the RTOs. And that's what needs to be done. Not happening.
Yeah. Well, I would agree with Jack. Some number of HVDC stations that enable the interconnection of the grid would help that. And basically with renewables, at least let's take solar as an example, you're chasing the sun. And so you can chase the sun to the west, which is really good for the East Coast and the Midwest. When you get to California, they have more difficulty chasing the sun. But that could be part of the solution if we were interconnected to improve some of the intermittency issues.
Right, and I agree. I think it's more about a physical interconnection rather than a national one-size-fits-all policy. But certainly the physical connection is going to be more and more important going forward.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, we've run out of time. I just want to thank you three gentlemen for sharing your insights and your wisdom with the audience, and thanks everybody for your attention. Please join me in thanking them with your applause.